Hello and welcome to this episode of the Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn, Matt, and I are going to talk about endings. What makes a great ending, and what does it entail? So, opening thoughts, either of you? Are endings hard? Start there. Start with the problems.
Well, we ended the last one with beginnings are hard, openings are hard. So I guess endings have to be hard too.
Wait, are middles hard?
It's all hard. It's all very
hard.
difficult.
Everything is hard.
So I have one thought, which is that everybody always tells me that endings have to be surprising and inevitable, and that seems like an impossible trick. So what's the trick?
Surprising,
inevitable and
inevitable, right? Yeah. I don't know if endings are always inevitable and surprising. I think that's a nice ideal to hold up as kind of a lofty goal. And inevitable is that sense you get as a reader after you finish the book and you're reflecting on it, and you're like, yes. Oh, yeah, that had to happen that way. You know, A Stone's Throw book, I kill off one of my protagonists at the end of the book. And I've never had a reader be mad about that. I've had readers tell me that they weren't happy she died, but it had to happen. So that's that sense of inevitability.
Right.
Where, you know, an ending could have gone a whole bunch of different ways, but when you look back at the entire character arc and all the choices that character made along the way, you see how that is the right ending. So that's inevitability.
Yeah.
In surprises, I suppose killing a character was a surprise. That doesn't happen. You don't too often kill off your POV.
Right.
Especially in American fiction.
Well, I think the surprising is when I, as a reader, don't make it to the 30% mark and go, I know how this is going to end.
Right.
Like, and then I'm right. You know, like I want, it's not telegraphed through the whole book. Like your reader hasn't picked it up by the time that they get there. I mean, they can be a little bit ahead of the text. Like it's okay if they're like, oh, this is going to happen. Oh, it's happening. Like that's one thing versus I know it's going to happen. And then it plays out exactly the way that the reader is anticipating. Right. That's the part where I lose interest so fast if I think I already know what's going to happen and then
Absolutely.
it happens.
Right,
Yeah.
but then there are genres where you can't not have a certain ending. Like in a romance, the girl and the guy get each other. In a mystery, the crime is solved. You know, unless
But the details are always different. So you can have surprising things that happen in a already established, like I know it's a happy ending. I know it's going to work out. I just don't know how it's going to work out. And I want to know that how. I don't want to have it already in my brain before I get there. I want that how to be the surprising part. Like, that's an interesting way of doing that versus, yep, knew that was coming.
So still the same like feeling of resolution, but in a unique or surprising or special way that you didn't expect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, resolution is just the feeling of satisfaction that all of the loose ends have been tied up. You don't have open-ended questions at the end of the book, so the reader is satisfied. Now, that's different from a series where you need to have some subplots that are open-ended that hook the reader into the next book. But the main plot should have a resolution, which gives you a sense of closure around the events within that book.
Yeah, I was looking at, so that in that short story workshop I took, they talked about the 7-point plot outline, which is very familiar to most people. But at the end, instead of calling it resolution, they called the last point validation, which I kind of like that word a little bit better because it implies that you're validating what happened in the story, right? Like you're reinforcing the point. And obviously they were talking about short stories, and the ending in a short story could be 100 words or 200 words or whatever. It doesn't have to be long to give the reader that sense of validation. or that
Are you
sense of
validating the reader or the character? Like, what is being validated at the end?
Right.
What
It's
was
just
their
another
point?
word for, it was just another word for resolution. But I think resolution, a lot of people feel like, oh, it has to be completely wrapped up. It has to be completely resolved. There can't be any loose ends, whereas with validation, it says that the main storyline, like you said, needs to have resolution, but there can be other unanswered questions.
Right. Well, okay, there are two types of endings. One is resolved and the other ending is ambiguous. And it's much more common to have an ambiguous ending in a short story where you leave the ending open-ended for the reader to decide what happens next. And usually when you do that, the writer is asking the reader to make that choice. You want the reader to put down the story and keep churning it over and thinking about it. You really are hoping to create a story that sticks with readers that way so that they continue to spin off the tale and figure out what happens to those characters.
Right.
Another ambiguous issue is that these are often uncomfortable endings for the reader. So at the end of a short story, it's one thing to feel uncomfortable because it's not resolved and you don't really know what happens. At the end of a novel, where a reader has invested so much time in this storyline, to leave your main plot ambiguous or your main character's, life ambiguous in an uncomfortable way can lead to reader dissatisfaction and reader anger, right? Which isn't ideal, I guess. You could certainly do it with certain risks. It would be an interesting choice because it would have to make sense for that story. Right.
So I guess in the short story sense, that validation is saying this conflict had to happen. Like, I'm validating that this conflict was necessary, so that when you get that ambiguous ending, you're not, as a reader, then questioning, why did this even happen? Like, what is going on? But you can have that thinking about the reactions and the actions and consequences type thing, because you've validated as an author that this conflict was necessary. Versus with a novel, the idea of resolution is not only have you said this conflict was necessary, but this is the end results. This is the satisfaction that you get as a reader to know that you went through this journey. It wasn't all in vain. It wasn't just to make you think. But I think it's more accepted with a short story to have that idea of, this is going to make me think and this is going to make me wonder.
But I don't think they were talking about ambiguous endings. I think that you could use the word validation to talk about the end of a novel too.
Right. Right, but then again, what are you validating?
You're validating the whole point of the book.
Why? I'm having issue with the semantics here. Like, why? What's the difference between validate and resolve at the end of a novel?
I think they're synonyms to me. They're synonyms. But I don't necessarily always like the word resolution, because what if there's a little bit of a cliffhanger? What if you're leaving some questions unresolved, even though the main storyline is resolved? Right.
Well, that's fine. That's totally great and dandy.
With the word resolution, right. That's why I'm saying they're synonyms.
Okay.
Semantics.
Yeah, I don't think they are. I don't think resolve and what was it?
Validate.
Validate.
Yeah,
I was thinking satisfy.
I just think of parking garages when you say validation. So
will you validate my parking?
Every story I write is now going to end in a parking garage.
There you go.
With
See, I've validated it. It's good.
Ticket has been validated. All right, get out of here.
Yeah. See, okay, so let's talk about satisfying resolutions to stories, because the word validate for one person is a synonym, for another person isn't, and we've got Kathryn in the parking garage.
That's right.
So do you need to have a satisfying resolution at the end of a book? The short answer is no. I think you need to have a satisfying resolution to your main plot, but subplots can be left open-ended, and they often should be. I think it's good to leave readers with something to carry forward into their week, right? You don't want your book to be forgettable, close the cover and walk away and, Also, if you're writing a series, then you need some open-ended threads to lead you into the next book but those should be the subplots, not the main plots. They should be character driven, not action driven.
Right. And in real life, not all of your conflicts are going to wrap up all at once. So your book feels a lot more real if you're not like everything's tying up all at the same time into the ending. Like, that's just not the way life is. And so the more things you have kind of bubbling around, as long as that main conflict is ending, it makes it feel more real for the characters.
Right. Definitely. And it's interesting what readers attach to, which I think goes back to the notion of characters and empathy and how important that is in a book. When I wrote A Stone's Throw, I've got 3 point of view characters, and Peter has a small point of view. You know, it's like 40-40-20 or something, with Peter being the 20. And at the end of the book, Simone is dead. I wrote an epilogue for Gemma 5 years later, because it was really their 2 character arcs. And in both America and Germany, readers have asked what happened to Peter. And I did actually, when I was writing the book, write a scene where he goes from London back to America with Simona's baby, and, you know. And I cut it. I didn't put it in the published books. I thought, it's too obvious. It's so easy. You know, he's a good dad. He raises his daughter. Everything is fine. Their life is just normal, happy father-daughter. You know, he meets some nice woman. I don't know. And readers kind of fixate on that.
Because it's unresolved.
Right. It's open-ended. And I wouldn't...
They unresolved.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, what the writer thinks is resolved enough, readers might fixate on and say, like, I hate that I don't know what happens to this guy.
Right. And, you know, my response to that is, what do you want to happen to him? Right? You want him to go off and just... You want his baby to have a happy life, so that's what happens to him.
Yeah.
Like, you can decide. If you want to create a new tragedy for Peter, go for it.
I mean, I've got very similar comments from the ending of the Auriga project. The main plot is definitely resolved, but there's open-ended subplots, and it kind of ends on a little bit of a teaser, and people don't like it, you know? But that doesn't mean that the book is unresolved.
Right. No, it means that
they just the next book.
You've got intrigue to lead readers into book 2, which is good.
Right.
That's exactly what you want. You want the main plot to have a satisfying resolution, and then intrigue to go into book 2. And A Stone's Throw is a standalone novel. I have no intention of writing a new book.
Right.
I just felt like adding an epilogue for Peter was unnecessary and too obvious, you know?
Yeah. Well, it takes the critical thinking away from the reader a little bit, you know?
Right. Right.
Well, with a literary novel like that, that's probably more common too, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm certainly comfortable leaving it open-ended, and maybe the readers who bothered to comment are in the minority and not the majority. I don't know. I mean, nobody ever bothers to say, oh, I'm so glad you didn't write an epilogue for Peter, right? You don't hear that feedback, so.
That's true. That's true. So, I mean, I guess the takeaway from this is, like, you have to write the ending that fits your genre and that satisfies readers, right? So if you have a mystery, the crime has to be resolved. You have a romance, you have to have a happy ending. But resolved doesn't mean that every storyline is resolved. It just means that the main storyline is resolved.
Right.
And it's up to the artist to choose whether to leave these things open-ended, or to leave, you know, to wrap them up, or to let them lead into the next book, or to let the reader figure out the ending.
Right, and you've got to factor in all of those things, like genre, your artistic and creative desires, readers' expectations, what is best for the story. I always put that first, because that sense of inevitability applies also to the story that you're telling. You know, what is really necessary to create the best story that I can create? And I think that trumps reader expectations every time, because you can play with reader expectations, you can subvert them, and you might upset a few people, and they might be the vocal minority, but that doesn't mean you didn't do exactly what should have been done for your story and for your artistry, you know.
And but you can't ignore them either, because if you have a mystery and the crime never gets solved, you're just going to have a bunch of unhappy people.
Well, I think even if the crime doesn't get solved, you can still have a resolution to the story. So the resolution might be that the crime goes into the cold case file and that your protagonist now has to live with the guilt and the burden of not being able to solve the crime. And so the resolution might be around some other part of the process. And especially if you're writing a series, then that can be a very interesting thing to carry forward into the next book as part of your character's backstory. You know, so resolution is when a reader closes the book and says, yeah, that made sense, and I'm so glad I went on this journey, and I'm really satisfied with the 20 hours I spent reading this novel, as opposed to going, what? And throwing the book against a wall. I've never done that, but I hear people do it. So
I usually don't get to that point if
right.
Good.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that's me. Some people read books all the way to the end even if they hate them. I never understood that.
Yeah, I don't get that either.
There's too many books to read. I don't have time for this.
Definitely. So do you have any thoughts on endings or questions, Kathryn?
I am feeling quite satisfied. I'm resolved.
Oh, yay!
Are you also validated?
But are you validated? Yeah. Should we stamp your ticket?
Yes, please.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool. I feel like we've just wrapped that up.
Okay.
Any other? Okay, so character, main plot, resolution, open-ended hooks, ambiguous endings. You've got to do what's right for your story and put that first. All right, now we're all just nodding our heads. Yep.
Yep. Do that then.
Do that. End your books.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for watching this episode of the Storyworks Roundtable. You can find this and all of our recordings at wordessential.com/storyworksroundtable.